after the absolute shellacking the Steelers took at the hands of the Bills, there's lots of questions about this team, not just on the field, but also off of it when it comes to the focus that they have and whether or not some guys are taking these losses seriously enough. There was some locker room turmoil. To talk about that with us is Brian Batko, of course, of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter, also the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is the North Shore Drive and your Monday episode, getting Steelers fans ready for a long week after that loss. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the Monday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko, and this is the show for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that you can find anywhere, but especially on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, get all of our episodes here. This show is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but we have lots of content that comes out all throughout the week, including myself and Noah Hiles with a Pitt mailbag episode coming out tomorrow. Today's episode is brought to you by Acrisure Fan Advantage, the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. Using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pre-game breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights, starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No apps or downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. Brian, there was no real edge for the Steelers in this game. There was, I guess you could say, for the first drive. When they scored a field goal in their first drive, it was like, holy crap, what does that even feel like? And then after that, it was just all downhill.
That opening kickoff, great job by Chris Boswell, and then Trey Norwood to back up the Bills at the 2. Oh, wait. Yeah, that just kind of made the initial strike by Josh Allen and company even more
impressive.
Yeah. It was a brutal game. I'm not going to lie to you, Chris. I found myself in the car ride back from Buffalo with Jerry Dulac and Ray Fittipaldi. I found myself perusing 2023 mock drafts a little bit. I can't lie to you. It's kind of where you're at right now with the Steelers.
I mean, that has to be where you're at this point, right? I mean, they're not giving you much hope that they're going to turn it around. They're getting destroyed like that. It puts that into you. So we can get into that later. But I think what a lot of people were talking about, and Ray Fittipaldi wrote about this after the game. Talking about there was some turmoil in the locker room when you guys went in there, and so a bit of yelling and some tensions amongst the Steelers players after that loss. And Arthur Marlette was seen challenging teammates, and he was saying, y'all have to love this. And he's like, you're losing like that, and guys are laughing and smiling on the sidelines. It's 38-3, and people are laughing on the bench. You have to love it. And there was and Miles Jack also commented, just saying like, you don't want this, and you want to be able to fight, without there, and you want to have the emotion. But Brian, it's a sense that the Steelers, they've been here for, like, they've literally had this record before in recent years, but there is just a sense of, there isn't the same sense of like, hey, we could kick up out of this. There isn't the sense of like, hey, this is going to be something that you can turn around. Do you get a sense that like some of the guys who haven't been here for the long haul don't understand, I guess, the gravity of this situation that the Steelers are in, and that they could actually legitimately let this season fall off a cliff?
I don't know if that's so much it. I mean, 4-game losing streak for the first time since 2016, I think, to open that season. So this particular group of guys, not only have they not really been together all that often, none of them were on that team back then. So except for, Cam Hayward, I guess, and, I guess Boswell at that point. But yeah, I mean, there's very little carryover. It's kind of a bigger philosophical discussion. How much do you need to compartmentalize the embarrassment, the hurt that you feel after a loss like that versus, I don't know, Chris. I mean, you see players come to the middle of the field after every game, say what's up to their old teammates. They pray, they do kind of, they take pictures, jersey swaps. Like, should you not be allowed to do any of that if you get 35-point blowout put on you? I don't know. I mean, that's right. A hard question to ask. But with Arthur Marlette specifically, and yeah, some of the, I don't want to say infighting, maybe it was just natural emotions carrying over. I mean, I've seen him frustrated after other losses this year. So it wasn't necessarily a new thing yesterday, but it was more noticeable. It was louder. I talked to Miles Jack, also, who asked him what Mike Tomlin's message was after the game to the team. He said, basically, wallow in this, bask in this, soak in this, so that you can remember how you don't want to feel this way again. And I asked, did any players kind of get up in front of you guys and say something? And he said, yeah, some guys did. And everybody kind of got a chance to say their piece. He didn't divulge exactly who said what, but I think even before we as reporters were let in there to see some of the tempers continuing to flare, I'm sure there were some passionate discussions being had behind closed doors in that locker room. And it feels like it's a sense of frustration that has been building really for a while. And I sort of wonder how much of it is you don't have Ben Roethlisberger in there anymore. I'm not saying he necessarily had the greatest or closest relationship with a lot of those guys in that locker room, but is there a sense of, hey, we've got this vet who you kind of need to act a certain way when his presence is there? That's not around. That's just kind of one hypothesis of mine that I'm throwing out there and noticing 4 weeks in. Just, other than Cam Hayward, there's not a whole lot of long-time leadership on this team, especially with no TJ Watt around at the moment.
Right. And I think that's part of this, is that it's not just necessarily like your presence. Because the thing is, like Ben Roethlisberger last year, he wasn't a great player last year. It was just more so like, hey, that guy, he's been through a lot of these wars before. You can at least trust that he knows how to handle a tough situation, or at least approach a tough situation. But at this point, when you're not getting answers on the field, and you don't have that part, that's when more of these questions start to happen. And I think it also comes with, you have an offensive coordinator in Matt Canada, and I'm not even talking about schematics and concepts and play calls, but he doesn't have a presence in the NFL. This is his first foray into
Right.
pro football. He's been a college coach for many years. This isn't like Todd Haley and Keith Butler or Dick LeBeau, when they were there for those years. And to your point, back in 2016, when they won in that 4-game losing streak, they fell to 4-5. There was a lot of questions about that team, but they had guys they could rally around. Ryan Shazier stepped up that year. They had guys step up into the moment, and I think that's part of the thing that the Steelers need right now. Whereas like they had guys like Lawrence Timmons and Cam Hayward who had been there for several years. It took guys like Ryan Shazier to step up. It took guys on offense to step up as well. I think 2016 was one of those years you saw Le'Veon Bell truly just take over the league again. But the question is, do they even have guys who can do that on this roster right now? Alex Highsmith has 5.5 sacks, which is still 4th most in the NFL. Only I think it's like 3 guys are tied for 6 ahead of him, but they hit the quarterback once, and it was on a blitz from Minkah Fitzpatrick. They need somebody to have a presence in the game that's a game changer, and when that doesn't happen, you're going to have games like this. It makes you wonder. Is like, man, like how are they as close as they were in their last 3 losses? When they all came down to like the final minutes, or like or our final score.
Yeah, I mean, it's the chicken and egg discussion of any NFL team. How much of it is lack of talent versus, a lack of effort or leadership right now when it comes to the Steelers? And, they've got 5 captains. One of them is Cam Hayward, who I think is certainly doing his part. He was better yesterday after having some struggles after TJ Watt's initial injury. One of them is Miles Killebrew, who's a special teams guy. One of them is Mitch Trubisky, who's been benched. One of them is Najee Harris, who I think is a young guy in general, still kind of trying to feel out how that role goes, and he's not playing well. And then the other one's TJ Watt, who's away from the team entirely. And our Jerry Dulac reported last night that he's probably not going to be back on the field so after the bye week. So there's a leadership void. I think that contributes. I think just plain getting beat by guys who are better than you contributes. That a lot. There was a lot of that on the field Sunday at Highmark Stadium in Buffalo, and I mean it is going to cause frustration. But I think one thing that Mike Tomlin's teams have been pretty consistently good at over the years is they've been able to channel that frustration into turnarounds, playing better, finding themselves versus getting numb to it and, packing it in and losing, giving up on a season.
I think that's the big thing, right? I mean, you look back to, I think it was 2013 when they started the season out 0-4, and it was a question of like, wow, it was a lot of the same things. Like you were talking about, you're looking at mock drafts on your way back from Buffalo. A lot of people were doing the same thing. Well, Steelers getting a top 5 pick this year, and they found their way to 8-8. When Ben Roethlisberger got hurt, and I think they fell to it. They were 1-4 in 2019. A lot of the same questions then, but each time under Mike Tomlin, there has been some resiliency, some sense of, hey, we got to kick this in, and there have been the the guys to do it, whether it was Cam Hayward, whether it was Minka Fitzpatrick or TJ Watt, or, and then years past, maybe Le'Veon Bell or, David DeCastro on that offensive line, or Ben Roethlisberger at times. But there needs to be some of those guys. Some guys need to step up. I want to talk to you more specifically about the offense and the passing game that leads to all of it, because I think a lot of that builds into what the Steelers are going through right now with their struggles on both sides of the ball. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our sponsors at Liquid Death. If you're out tailgating, you may notice some people that might be crushing some tall boys all day long, and they're staying completely sober. They're actually looking pretty good. And you're like, how is this even possible? Well, they're probably not crushing beer. They're probably crushing Liquid Death, which is the awesome new mountain spring water that you can get from any retailer out there. But Liquid Death, it's called this because it murders your thirst, and it's murdering plastic pollution across the planet. I've had a lot of these. They are awesome. They're fresh. It's fresh water in a can, not a bottle. It tastes really good, and it looks just like a beer. And they donate 10% of the profits from every can to help kill plastic pollution. Plus, it just flat out tastes great. I crack these open all the time. You hear that sound. It sounds just like you're opening a beer. You taste it. It's fresh water. It's ice cold fresh water. All this was just in my fridge, and it's just like you're drinking something right out of a Brita. It's like, it tastes awesome, filtered, no plastic sense of it. It's a great chance for you to get fresh water, and you can get it at Target, 7-Eleven, County Fair, wherever, or you can also find a Liquid Death retailer near you with a store locator tool located at liquiddeath.com/shore. That's liquiddeath.com/shore. Back here on the North Shore Drive, I am Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. We are the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Brian, this offense, like we said, a lot of hope in the first drive. You saw, and Kenny Pickett came out, converted 2 third downs. You saw the poise there. And I guess before we get to the receivers, I want to get your thoughts on Kenny Pickett. I thought, despite no touchdowns being scored, I was like, this guy was actually out there fighting, and it looked like he was at least composed in a lot of his decisions.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what we just talked about in the first segment, I mean, when you look at the upcoming schedule and really for the balance of the season, not a whole lot of hope on the horizon to turn this thing around and finish with a respectable mark. But in the big picture, longer term, I think there is hope, and a lot of that revolves around number 8, partially because of just in general, the optimism that comes with picking a guy in the first round and putting your faith in a rookie quarterback, but also and knowing that there's going to be ups and downs, but also some of the things he did tangibly show this week to try to build on his, coming in cold performance in week 4 against the Jets. The initial game plan seemed sound. He was standing in there, taking some hits, a couple plays that could have gone either way for him. And if they go the other way, maybe they extend the drive and maybe they punch it in, and maybe that game has a different tone. I'm not suggesting the Steelers would have won based on some more early momentum, but maybe it just has a different tone to it and things go differently instead of going south as quickly and thoroughly as they did. But yeah, I don't think he was anywhere near the list of the biggest issues for this team. You saw him with a willingness to use his legs here and there. I think he maybe even had a couple more chances that he decided to try to throw instead. Only the one really, really horrendous decision, throw, everything on the interception, targeting Deontay Johnson. End of the half, he's probably just grasping at straws at that point and have to realize you can't do that. But it was a situation where it was snowballing on them, and that clearly affected the young QB in his first start with that play. But other than that, there was a lot of good. It was spraying the ball at times. Inaccuracy popped up here and there, but that's going to happen when you throw 55,000 times the way he did in that game. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to build on. It's just going to be difficult because you've got more good defenses these next 3 weeks. And that's why I keep coming back to, I simply think Mike Tomlin mishandled this quarterback situation in a lot of ways. And I don't know what the right answer was, but I'm pretty sure the wrong answer was giving him his first start on the road against the Bills.
Right. And this is something that I've been talking about a lot too, is just this the best chance to either bring Kenny Pickett in was the long week heading into the Jets game so that he could at least have the full week to prepare with the first team, which he didn't. or it was after the bye week when they get this gauntlet of teams out of the way. And this was what I think that maybe the Steelers were afraid of this. Maybe they were like, you know what, we don't want to see. We don't want to see Kenny Pickett go up against the Bills and then the Buccaneers and Tom Brady and then the Dolphins and then the Eagles. I mean, all of those teams got talent on the defensive side of the ball. Heck, the Bills were the number 2 defense going into this week. They might be the number 1 defense after this week's over. Then you got the Buccaneers, who are aggressive on defense. They're not playing as well this year as they have been, but still they've got a lot of talent. The Eagles and the Dolphins both got talent on that side of the ball. It's a lot to ask of him, and like you said, and I think that was maybe they were trying to get Mitch Trubisky to get through that part of the year, but they just realized, hey, man, it's just not working. They got to move forward. But, I mean, frankly, Brian, if Mitch Trubisky starts this game, they might not get any points because I just don't see – we didn't see any fluidity in the offense. There was at least at times where you saw Kenny Pickett had a plan. He knew where to go with the ball, and it didn't work sometimes. Again, there were some serious issues, and this is where I want to get to you mainly about the offense. This is not a team that can run the ball consistently, and Najee Harris does have problems. There is definitely an injury that's factoring in there, but a lot of it too is that teams aren't necessarily lining up 8 in the box, but they are flying to the line of scrimmage anytime he might get the football. There were a lot of those tackles. Damar Hamlin, a safety, was coming from way back because he knew, hey, they're running the football here, and they were taking them out. And a lot of that means the Steelers have to pass to set up the run because no one's buying into like, hey, no one's scared of them throwing the ball. And in this game, there were opportunities for them to prove that point, but Deontay Johnson had multiple drops in this game, had 2 plays where I think at least 3 plays where he could have gotten his toe in on the sideline, and he just didn't. And if he hits on any of those plays, I'm not saying the Steelers win the game, but it gives you a chance to set a different tone. But if you're not capitalizing on those opportunities that your quarterback is giving you, you're putting yourself in a bad situation where the defense continue to say, you know what? We're not afraid of you throwing the ball. Go ahead, do it. We're going to keep rushing the line of scrimmage, take away the short passes, and try to take away Najee Harris. And now you got a game where Deontay Johnson took 13 targets, only caught 5 of them for 60 yards. That's just not good production.
Yeah, I know you can't expect him to make a circus catch the way he did in that week 1 win against the Bengals every single time, but he says he's the number 1 receiver. He's, he wanted that contract. He thinks he's elite. If that's the case, you gotta make those plays more often than not. And I talked to him after the game. The one that he himself called it a drop was the slightly high ball from Kenny Pickett that was nearly intercepted by Dane Jackson that could have extended a drive. He said that was a drop, but he thought he bounced back from that. He was disappointed he didn't get his feet down on the one on the sideline because that was another incredible catch had it stood. And he didn't really get into that one at the end where he just couldn't hang on also along the sideline up near the goal line. He said it was windy out there, but he didn't want to make excuses. Fans aren't going to want to hear that, obviously. No. They want him to help out his quarterbacks a little bit more. Shoot, he didn't do Mitch Trubisky really any favors in that, those sequences that led to his ultimate benching. So Kenny Pickett, if he's the quarterback, like I said before, you're going to have to live with some good, some bad from a rookie, especially making his first starts against some really high caliber NFL defenses. But he also needs guys to make plays for him, especially highest paid player on the offense and, Chase Claypool getting open. And shoot, we haven't even mentioned Pat Freiermuth, the most dependable set of hands on this team. Who knows how long he's going to be out, Chris?
That's what I was going to ask you. I think this is his 3rd concussion when you look at it. And that's not just a football problem. That's a life problem. And that's a situation where now he has to look at it. And, if you're the Steelers, Mike Tomlin, is famous for not putting in Ryan Clark and, standing up for his guys and saying, I'm going to put their health and safety over football. And Pat Freiermuth, he's very much a needed part of this offense for it to work. And when he's out, it's a big problem up the middle. But again, you can't put him at risk when that. I mean, after he took that one hit, which was crown of the helmet hit, he went down. It wasn't an illegal hit. I want to point that out because a lot of Steelers fans, well, what about that? Like he wasn't defenseless. He was moving forward.
That's just football,
that's part of the dangers of football. But also the scary part of football, you saw him, and when he was down, you just saw he was hurt. He was not getting up, and you saw, I think it was James Daniels who was like, yeah, this is a problem. Get over here. this is now a major concern for him, and it's another one of those big injuries that they have to find a way to navigate their way around. Pat Freiermuth, I think, was a big part of what they were trying to build this offense through, giving the middle part of the field something there. And now it comes down to a situation where, Brian, in the first segment, we talked about someone needs to step up. Pat Freiermuth, in my mind, would have been one of those guys, and now he can't be there. I just think it puts even more of an onus on the receivers to find ways to not only get open, but make the catches and make plays after the ball's in your hands.
Right. I mean, those head injuries obviously are really tough.
Yeah.
All those things, returning to play, considering your career life off the field, those all come down to individual choice. And I know Freiermuth's a really intelligent guy who also loves the game. So just hoping for the best for him, and that was worse than it looked, or excuse me, not as bad as it looked
right
on TV.
Right. No, I hear you entirely there. We could talk about the offense all day.
Hey, George Pickens made a great catch along the sideline in one-on-one coverage. That was like, you want to talk about, there's no silver linings from a 38-3 loss, but that was one, I don't know what we can call it, like just the slightest bit of positivity that came out of that game.
No, absolutely. And George Pickens, I mean, in the last two games, he had 100 yards last week. He had 83 yards this week on 6 targets. And he's going up and getting the ball in one-on-one coverage, bringing it down. Maybe he's your 50-50 ball guy now, because Chase Claypool hasn't done that. Deontay Johnson's hands haven't been consistent. George Pickens looks like a guy he can do that kind of stuff. And maybe you need that guy to be the spark of this offense. I do think there needs to be some consideration. If Matt Canada, if you want to point at something for him, he needs to find other ways for them to key up, ways for George Pickens to get the football for big play opportunities. And I think you've seen the last 2 games, Kenny Pickett is willing to take the shot to give them those play opportunities.
The old F it, George is down there somewhere.
Exactly. He's down there somewhere. Just get it to him. And you know what? Like again, like the deep ball that he threw to Chase Claypool that was intercepted against the Jets. I'm okay with those decisions, because it's like, hey, 50-50, one-on-one, trust your guy to go get it. We haven't seen enough of that on this Steelers offense in a long time, and it's not always going to work. But with this offense that's inconsistent, it doesn't have the fluidity to have several sustained drives, you're going to need shot plays, which means you're going to need to gamble in certain areas. And I think that gambling with George Pickens right now is probably better than any other gamble that you can have in the passing game. But we got to talk about the defense too, because they were just as bad, if not worse, than the Steelers offense in this one. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Yinzers in the Berg. Yinzers, listen up. The Steelers campaign is off and running, so show your support for your black and gold. If you're a big Kenny Pickett fan, best way to get some Kenny Pickett merchandise is heading to Yinzers in the Berg. They have 2 legendary shops in the Strip District. If you're here in Pittsburgh, or if you're not in the city of Pittsburgh, you can go online to their store at yinzerspgh.com. You'll find all the best Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. Go there to get some Yinzers in the Berg gear today. Again, they are in the Strip District with 2 different stores, or check out their websites at yinzerspgh.com. That's yinzerspgh.com for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. Brian, we, again, just as much as we could talk about what's wrong with the offense all day, we could talk about what's wrong with the defense all day. But this defense was built on the idea that they were going to be able to control games. I think that they gave up that first big play to Gabe Davis. It was one of those plays where one guy bit down inside, and it's Trey Norwood, and that kind of exposed the whole defense, for that play. But this was a game where, and Mike Tomlin talks about this a bit, is like, where, hey, like sometimes you got to tip your hat to the other team. The deep ball that Josh Allen threw to Gabe Davis that was over Minkah Fitzpatrick that he almost came away with was one of the most perfect throws and catches that I've seen in the NFL. That could have been. There was only one place to place that ball. There was only one way to catch that ball, and you had to pull it away from the guy who's been the best safety in football.
Both of those were ridiculous to see live. I mean, Allen's arm strength, Davis's ball skills, like they were both just silly, stupid plays that almost make you say, like, what is even the point of following or rooting for another team in the NFL if we don't have that mutant at quarterback or someone similar?
It's a big question, but there are plenty of things the Steelers, of course, needed to do differently in this game. They got one hit on Josh Allen. This is a defense that's supposed to get after the quarterback. They're supposed to be able to, put some fear in him, make him feel you, and make him feel your presence. Josh Allen never did. The only person who got an official quarterback hit registered was Minkah Fitzpatrick. No Alex Highsmith, no Cam Hayward, no Larry Ogunjobi, even though he left in the middle of this game. No DeMarvin Leal, who early on he had a breakup. He looked like he was making some plays. He had 2 breakups in this game. Had a good tackle, but then it was nothing else. And then there's real concerns. Miles Jack led the team with 6 tackles, but all of them beyond the line of scrimmage. Devin Bush, 4 tackles, all of them beyond the line of scrimmage. Robert Spillane, he had a couple breakups, but he didn't register a single tackle in this game.
Broke up one with his
back
derriere.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, his derriere.
But got a little bit lucky that one hit him where the sun don't shine.
Exactly, I agree.
Right over to his head for a touchdown.
When that happened, I was like, that is the most Robert Spillane breakup of Robert Spillane's career. Like, it just got thrown into your back, and you know what? You get credit for it, buddy. But this is a problem. Malik Reed not making a difference here. And I think that's the problem, is no one has made a play. No one has beat their man consistently enough. And you see guys try. It's not that they're not trying. Minkah Fitzpatrick's out there trying to strip the ball away from Gabe Davis. Cam Hayward punched a ball out literally half a second before it got over the goal line to give the Steelers a turnover. And you see, like, Levi Wallace, he got an interception out there on Josh Allen. There were plays being made, but it's not consistently across the board. And I think a lot of it starts with this non-existent pass rush.
Yeah, and that's the dilemma they're in right now. I mean, you kind of said it, Chris. I mean, at some point, guys just have to beat their man one-on-one. That's the calculated risks you have to decide if you want to take. If you're a defensive coordinator, do we blitz more to try to generate that pressure? Well, look what happened when they brought Minkah on the blitz. The Bills took the top off. So, I mean, it's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, is in that regard. And people were saying all week they need to play tighter man coverage more than zone. Well, what can happen when you play man? Josh Allen can just go right over your head.
And you're playing man coverage. By the end of this game, no Ahkello Witherspoon, no Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace got hurt, Terrell Edmonds wasn't playing. You already are missing DeMonte KZ. That's 5 of your top 6 defensive backs that couldn't be on the field. When you're playing man coverage, you're trusting guys to win one-on-one. It means when there's next man up, that's the cute thing to say, and that's what the coaches need to say to tell the backups to get ready and to practice seriously.
Like Tomlin says, we have starters in waiting, but you're going to tell me Josh Jackson was a starter in waiting?
Exactly.
He was on the practice squad.
Exactly. You're not expecting Arthur Marlette to blanket Stephon Diggs. You're not expecting those guys. You're not expecting Trey Norwood to go out there and make the plays that Minkah Fitzpatrick is making. That's just like, I think fans take those words way out of context and apply them in a way that they shouldn't.
However, we should note, I mean, who were the Bills throwing to on some of these plays? Khalil Shakir,
that's true.
Round rookie Quentin Morris. I've never even heard of the guy, but Dawson Knox was hurt, and someone named Isaiah Hodgins had a 22-yard catch, his first NFL reception. So, but Josh Allen can make mediocre pass catchers look good, and you need Minkah Fitzpatrick to try to make, I guess, mediocre role players look good, but it's a little different defensively.
It's different from quarterback to receiver versus safety simply communicating to other defensive backs. And again, this ain't no excuses. This is just a matter of like, hey, what do you do here? I think the Steelers, like you said, on that first touchdown pass, they tried to blitz Minkah Fitzpatrick because they said, hey, let's get our playmaker up in there. Let's see if he can be the difference maker. And you gave him a shot. And you're hoping Trey Norwood back there is in there, because normally that would be Terrell Edmonds. And normally Terrell Edmonds would stay back and say, hey, if they complete this deep pass, he's not getting past me. Trey Norwood just thought it was going to be a deep crosser, bit up a little too high, and that was what allowed Gabe Davis to get behind him. So there's little things like that, those little details that lead to just big mistakes and big plays by the other team. And if that's the Jets, like, it's funny enough, if that's the Jets, Zach Wilson don't make that throw, and they don't got a receiver that makes that makes those catches that Gabe Davis does. And again, that's not even counting Stephon Diggs. But again, when you have those playmakers, it makes it easier for all those guys that I'm not even going to be able to repeat right now that you just said on the Bills roster. It makes it easier for them to make plays. But I think that's where the Steelers defense's problems are, is that on the Bills offense, yes, they had a lot of injuries and guys that, wouldn't normally get as many snaps, but those guys don't have to carry the weight of the offense. Josh Allen's doing that. Stephon Diggs is doing that. Gabe Davis. The Steelers need their guys. Cam Hayward, even though he forced that fumble, they need people to be able to make plays on their own so that, hey, you know what? James Pierre was out there a lot. You don't need James Pierre to be a superstar, but he needs to be able to feed off of someone else. Someone else needs to take the burden off of him so that he can make the other plays. That's what they did so well in the first game against the Bengals. TJ Watt brought the heat, which allowed Alex Highsmith to get one-on-ones, which allowed other guys to get opportunities. And then the secondary is making plays. They're feeding off each other. And there's none of that right now in this defense.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, just so much attrition in the secondary, but that happens to teams. I think
happens, yeah.
Wasn't it a year or two ago, the Ravens were down to like, 3 guys they signed
6th and 7th string cornerbacks.
Right. So that happens in this league. It can be a reason for failure on individual game bases, but that at some point, coaching, talent acquisition, that's those guys' jobs and what they have to do to try to patch up holes and obviously developing guys once they get in your building. So just, a full-scale failure when you give up 400 yards to Josh Allen in the first half. And, this is the third or fourth time over the last couple seasons that honestly opposing offense could have just they could have named their point total if they wanted to keep slinging it. Twice against the Chiefs last year, the second Bengals game last year, and now this one. I mean, it's becoming a very disturbing trend for this defense. And I know that not having TJ Watt, that is kind of like if the Bills were missing Josh Allen. He's kind of the Steelers' Josh Allen. But at some point, somebody else has to have some pride, make a play. And that's sort of what Miles Jack was telling me after the game. Everybody has to look themselves in the mirror right now when this is happening. So the role players aren't doing enough to supplement. Like I thought Devin Bush probably had his worst game of the year.
I agree with
yesterday. We mentioned Spillane continuing to struggle in coverage. If it were me, Chris, I'm not doing anything drastic just yet, but Mike Tomlin talked about making change. He also has said in the past, you don't want to make change just for the sake of change. You got to have solutions. But he said he's going to start turnover stones to make sure this doesn't happen again. Get somebody else in. Get Mark Robinson a helmet. Maybe see what he can do. Isaiah Loudermilk, get him on the D-line. These things might have to happen anyway because of injuries. As for the secondary, I don't know. I guess I'll go back to the one thing I tweeted yesterday. Can we get some George Pickens at corner? Maybe just let him play both ways a little bit. That's all I've got, Chris.
And I think that's the thing here is that there's no answers that are just like magical. It's just like, oh yeah, just bring up the guy that you haven't been playing this whole time because you're just not playing.
Bring up the secret weapon at safety. Yeah, no,
exactly. Like people like look at like movies and they're just thinking like, oh, it's that simple. It's not. This team, we knew this team had certain paths to victory, and when these guys are out, those paths to victory are gone. They have to find other ways, and you're expecting, guys that aren't paid that aren't paid that much and they're NFL journeymen, they're NFL backups to become those playmakers. There's times where they might be able to pull it off, but this is what happens about team. You brought up the Ravens. They were last in the division last year. And there was a reason for that. And it was because they struggled. So that's where the Steelers are. Now the question is, like you said, can these guys look at themselves in the mirror? Can they say, hey, I have to do this? Who become those guys that step up? Because also, we've talked a lot about how new quarterback, new everything. This team is figuring out who are going to be the centerpieces for the next generation of the Steelers. We all knew this year wasn't a year that they were going to even contend for the Super Bowl. They might contend for the playoffs. We all thought like this was that kind of a year where, just like last year, they'd fight to get into the playoffs at the end if they were there. But these are the years where you got to find those guys, like the late 90s for Bill Cowher. You had to find guys like Hines Ward, like Alan Faneca, that stepped up and said, hey, these are guys I can build around. These are guys, Joey Porter. These are guys that in the roughest of moments, they were able to stand up and make plays and be difference makers so that when you have the roster, like the Bills, I mean, look at the Bills right now. They weren't like this, 5 or 6 years ago. It took years. They stunk for many years. It took a long time for them to get this good, but it took guys like Josh Allen. They added Stephon Diggs after the fact, but guys who didn't even play this game, Michael Poyer, Tremaine Edmonds, guys that were there. They had to go through those battles and those wars to be able to be successful in the long run. So I think that's what the Steelers are going through right now is they need to find guys who step up, and they've got Tom Brady coming to town next week as a time to do it. They get a home game before 2 more road games in the bye week. But
Brian,
I'm just not sure who that person is. If you had to pick 2 guys,
the Steelers need to promote O'Neal Cruz. That's what I think.
Use his exit velocity. That's the only way.
He's got some good size. He could maybe play on the outside.
6'7". The way he moves around the bases, I would love to see him try to cover somebody.
There you go.
We could do that. But we've talked about George Pickens. who do you think is the guy on defense that could step up? I'm not saying become a superstar, but a guy that Steelers fans could look to and say, hey, maybe he's a part of fixing the problem until TJ Watt gets back.
I think more from Highsmith. He was right there against the Jets. Could have had even more sacks, missed some chances to make a play. I still believe in him. Minkah is Minkah. He had a rough day at the office.
He did
yesterday, but there's going to be more positive plays than there are negative plays from him. So those are two that you have to look at. And yeah, maybe Miles Jack. I think he's been solid, but not spectacular. Maybe he needs to raise his game to spectacular the rest of the way at inside linebacker. Those are three from me. I think Cam Hayward is, he's going to continue to play his butt off, of course, but it's difficult, when you're going through it. You know what? DeMarvin Leal showed me a lot yesterday. I mean, he only played 23 snaps, but
yeah,
I would have guessed that he played twice as many because of how active he was and how often you saw him around the ball. And I think with a guy like Leal, it's up to the coaches to figure out best way to utilize him, especially and once TJ Watt does return.
We got to see who steps up. Maybe it's Leal, maybe it's Highsmith, but
maybe
somebody.
O'Neal Cruz. Yeah.
O'Neal Cruz. Okay.
There's well, I guess like Kenny Pickett is kind of like the Steelers equivalent of O'Neal Cruz right now. So.
I guess you could say that. Kenny Pickett.
The rest of this season, I think you're going to find a lot of Steelers fans, maybe our readers, our listeners, who they don't necessarily care where the record ends up for the Steelers. They don't give a rat's behind if they're 9-8 and miss the playoffs, but they just want to see tangible progress and some play from Kenny Pickett that makes them believe for the future. I remember talking to Browns fans a few years ago when things started looking like they were going to turn around for the Browns, and somebody I talked to was like, I'm not necessarily buying the hype, but like I just want to make sure that Baker is the right guy. And well, that didn't turn out.
That didn't work out.
But yeah, when you've got a young franchise quarterback in the mix, I think that almost supersedes whether you finish 9th or 10th in the AFC or 13th or 14th.
I agree.
I wouldn't even say lose as many games as you can so you can go get the best player you can in the draft. And we know that's not the Steelers' MO. And there's even the famous Mike Tomlin clip of telling Chase Young he can never get a guy like him. But maybe Mike could be the future to the 2022 Steelers.
I do think that this upcoming class is going to have a lot of talent that I think they need to address. A lot of people are talking offensive line. I truly think this team needs another bruiser on the defensive line. Cam Hayward, you can see he's fighting out there, but he's not the same Cam Hayward that he was 4 or 5 years ago when he was just wrecking, or even 2 years ago when he was wrecking everyone. And maybe he can be with another presence next to him. But they need to see someone step up there. We'll talk about that draft stuff later in the season, but first we've got to get through this year. Heck, it's just about to be week 6, so there's a long way to go. Brian, we'll all be on hand all week long. Yeah, I'll be at the Tomlin press conference along with the guys. You'll be there at practices all week long. There's a lot of stuff coming to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Hang in there, Steelers fans. If you want to do what Mike Tomlin said and kind of wallow in this misery, there's going to be a lot of ways to do that with the content that we're providing just to we
smile in the face of adversity as a sports staff. We will not cover them any worse, regardless of how poorly they're playing. So
obviously.
Yes.
There you are. Mike Tomlin has ingrained himself into our brains that we're using Tomlinisms on the North Shore Drive podcast. But Mike Tomlin speaks Tuesday. We'll have all that on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Do go there for all your sports content. Brian, thanks for joining me here in the North Shore Drive podcast. He's Brian Batko. I'm Chris Carter. We're both of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You've been listening to the North Shore Drive podcast. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube. Like the video if you saw it on YouTube, to subscribe to this channel to get all of our content here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back on your screens Wednesday, breaking more things down on your Pittsburgh Steelers and all things Pittsburgh sports. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.